to the Talent Optimization Podcast, the go-to podcast for CEOs and HR professionals wanting to bridge the gap between the strategy and tactical implementation of talent optimization within their organizations. Through interviews, predictive index, and personal experience, your host, Tracy Shirk, helps you discover the facets of talent optimization from both a CEO and HR perspective to truly create the dream team for your organization. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Welcome to the Talent Optimization Podcast. My name is Tracy Shirk, and I'm the Chief Talent Officer here at Elevated Talent Consulting. And it is December. And in December, it means holidays and all the fun things and family get-togethers and the yay on family get-togethers and the dread on family get-togethers and some heaviness that happens and all the things that are amazing about the holidays and all the things that are not. So with that being said, I am so excited to introduce you to our guest today. And who we have with us is Azizi Marshall. And Azizi is a creative arts psychotherapist. She is an award-winning corporate mental health trainer and organizational psychology individual. And so with that being said, Azizi, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Tracy. I'm so excited to be here.
Me too. Because, when you and I had chatted so often, it's like we are never taught how to handle the random things that come out of our mouths or our employees' mouths when we know somebody needs help, but we don't even know how to be like, are you okay? Or do we just walk away and be like, well, they were in a grumpy mood today?
Very true. We're never taught. We're never taught how to have those conversations, and they're so important to have.
Right. And, there's all this buzz, and rightly so, about mental health. But what actually is mental health?
So mental health is just as important as physical health, right? We go to a medical doctor to do our checkups and see that everything's working within our body. Mental health is the same way. So all of us, everybody has mental health. The challenge is sometimes a mental illness will creep up when we haven't addressed some of those thoughts that are preventing us from living our best life, or behaviors that we start to do that start to creep into our work-life balance and cause additional stress. So anything that starts to prevent our ability to live the way that we want to and need to, that's when mental health starts to decline and people need additional support then.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for example, I have a client that called me and said, hey, we have an individual who's hitting every single performance goal, every single one, but she's bringing all of this drama into work every single day. And we don't know what's going on, but some days she's super stable. Some days she's making crazy remarks. And how do we handle that? Is she okay?
Yeah. So, right there is bringing that person in for a conversation, and one that feels supportive. There's always this, and I hear it a lot of times working in inpatient psych, when I used to work in the prisons, that people never wanted to talk to HR about things that they were experiencing. And so you can imagine the type of mental health challenges that people have in working with individuals who are constantly toxic just in their own mental health, and then having to experience that on a day-to-day basis. So for them to be able to go into HR and feel supported in those conversations is key number one. So when they come in, having that welcome space and then saying, hey, I'm noticing some things are happening here and I want to be able to support you. What is going on? How are you really doing right now? It goes above and beyond just, how are you doing? Right? Then people will respond with, oh, fine. But how are you really doing? I want to know so I can help support you. And then that just opens up that conversation.
Right. Absolutely. And it's not just what you say, right? It's the way you say it. It's creating the space. It's not pulling out your cell phone every 2 seconds or having the dings happen on your computer that sends the message that you're not really there to support them.
Yeah, there's a lot of nonverbal communication that needs to happen. And that's one of the things that I love training leaders on how to do that. We're taught that as mental health professionals about active listening and the head nod. So if anybody goes to a therapist, you'll notice that they do the head nod when you talk to them. They reframe things that you say and you're like, yes, that's exactly it. So now you can start calling out your therapist for anybody who's going to see a therapist and say, I know what you're doing now. It's really important for you to be able to sit there and actively listen, nodding your head, making sure that you're making that eye contact and having that open body posture instead of having the arms crossed in front or looking to the side. You want to make sure that they feel welcomed by your own physical experience and what you're bringing to the table when you're talking to them.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're having conversation, which is building trust, right? And that's half of it right there, is if we have trust and we're building it, and yet there's still some issues going on. So often we'll say, hey, have you referred them to your employee assistance program? Have you created that supportive environment? And there's a limit to how much employers can do. And yet at the same time, there's so much that employers can do. So I'm curious for your take on that.
Yeah, so there's so many resources. Hopefully that the organizations that you're working at has some sort of EAP program. If not, there are so many mental health professionals in your community that you can reach out to and have those connections with them. Knowing whether they're taking on new clients, that's important to know, because it's very stressful for an employee to reach out and try to find a therapist. So if you can almost jump through that hoop for them to make it easier, that is super helpful for the employee to go, oh, they actually care enough to find someone that can support me instead of me having to make all those phone calls. Because I guarantee after the second phone call where they're not getting a response from anybody, they're just going to stop, because it is really stressful to try to find somebody themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And so often if you have an EAP program, that's part of what they will support doing, is they may do 3 to 5, sessions and refer, or just provide those referrals. And I think the other thing is looking at things as simple as Headspace for your staff, or BetterHelp, or some of those other things that are available are things that we've seen very successful as well. So your thoughts on that?
Well, there are many thoughts within the mental health professional field of apps versus therapy versus a place like BetterHelp. So there are some places to be really mindful of who you're choosing to put that support out for your employees, because sometimes the people who are on that platform are not always licensed within that state to provide mental health services. So that's something really important to know. Organizations can have or say that they're offering therapy, but they're actually life coaches or things like that. And life coaches are not trained to be able to support anybody who is dealing with a mental health crisis or a mental health diagnosis.
Right. Absolutely. So you have this summit coming up, and you're going to have some actors at the summit kind of going in and seeding different things to see if individuals know how to respond. So what are some of those things that those actors may say in conversation?
Yeah. So one example is the many conversations that happen when people come into the office and say, hey, my mom is really sick. I am stressed to the nines. I don't know how to keep doing what I'm doing and helping them. And I just need a break or some sort of accommodation so I can help. Like, a lot of times family stressors is what comes into that employee space. And so what we have with our actors is they act that scene out. And what's wonderful is people from the audience, so all of our HR professionals and business leaders, can come up and be that person in that seat, having the conversation with the actor so they can practice those skills. Because it's one thing to say, here's what you do in a conversation. It's another thing to actually do it. Because then once you're in that space again, your body has already done it. You already know how to make those connections, and it just becomes second nature at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. In these situations, with the holidays coming up, so often it's like, oh my gosh, I have to go over to Grandma Judy's, and she calls me fat every time I go over there, and, starts poking about something 20 years ago. And I just don't want to go. I'm like in hives thinking about it. What do I do?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because we do have a lot of clients that come in and have that same conversation with us about just the family dynamics. And just there's so many different family dynamics going on at this point in this world. And the conversations can be as simple as just saying no. And there doesn't have to be a reason behind it. I can tell you about my own family situation. We've decided not to do Thanksgiving together because of some of the conversations that have been had. And we decided to protect our own mental health as well as our children's, and said, you know what? It's just not the time yet. So when we're ready, we'll come back and we'll let you know. And if you want to have more conversation, we'd love to have that with you. But otherwise, it's a no for us this year.
And sometimes no is a complete sentence.
Exactly, Tracy. Exactly.
Yeah. And I think that there's other things that are around that, is setting some time frames as, you know what, we will absolutely come, but we're going to be there for 2 hours. And I just need you to understand before we come, like, I understand dinner's at 1, we're going to be there at 12:30. We're going to bring whatever it is, but we are going to leave by 2:30. I had to do the math in my head and make sure that I had the 2 hours. We're going to leave by 2:30, and we're excited to see you. However, there's a couple things that are absolutely non-negotiables for us. And if those lines get crossed, we're going to leave.
Yes, absolutely. There's been many political conversations that I'm sure families are struggling with right now too. And to say, hey, this is the boundary. If the boundary line is crossed, then we will have to leave. And that's okay.
So I love boundaries, right? But I think boundaries so often have so many different definitions to them. And as our listeners know, I'm really big on what a definition is, right? Because if we're not in alignment on the definition of boundary that we both agree on it, then we have a fight right there before we even get into it. So what is a boundary?
So a boundary is basically putting a line in the sand, saying, this is where I stop, and this is where I no longer am going to move forward. And I'm also not allowing you to come across this line either. So letting the person know, being very clear on what that line is setting the boundary. So a boundary can be saying, no, I'm not going to do that, or no, not at this time, but sometime later, or let me think about it. That's also a boundary.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think what's really important with the let me think about it is that you have an obligation of when are you going to come back and give an answer? Because it is not okay to say, let me think about it, and have that never come to a conclusion.
Exactly.
Awesome. So what other kind of tips or tricks do you have for our listeners as we're thinking about, I want to make sure that I'm best serving my staff, and if I don't know an answer, how do I provide that in a way that they still feel supported until I can get an answer?
Yeah, the biggest thing is checking in with them. So for my team, we have weekly check-ins, and it's not just our big team meeting, it's each individual employee. So again, I'm thinking of larger organizations. If you can't do that, then make sure that your leaders are checking in with each individual employee on a weekly basis, just as a check-in. Hey, how are you doing? I know that the holidays are coming up. Are there any things that you need to do, accommodate time-wise or project-based, that we can do to help support your mental health or to help support you with any sort of stressors that may be coming up, so that you feel like you are still being productive here at work?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a previous podcast that I'll link in the show notes, Jason Lawrenson. And one of the things that is in there that I think is so incredibly important is don't mix a check-in on the person and a check-in on the work.
Exactly. Two very different things.
Because if I'm just going to check in with you and say, how are you doing? Like, how are the kiddos? Last time we chatted, your puppy was in a cone and cone head. Like, how's he doing? You know, all of those things versus, hey, where's this report and where's that? And did you talk to this person? All of a sudden, we need to have both of those conversations, but we want to make sure that the person knows that they're whole and complete as they are as a person, and that they are not their doings, but we are our beings as well.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So what is a takeaway that you have for executives listening in today?
I would say a takeaway is to carve out that time for your people. They notice when you step out of that box to check in with them and make that actual human connection. And that will help them feel comfortable to talk with you in the future if there is anything that comes up within their own mental health or within the mental health of their family.
Awesome. And what's a takeaway for our HR professionals listening in today?
Yeah, so I love y'all in HR. So I will say the big takeaway for you all is to take care of yourself. You get a lot that is dumped on you, and you have a lot of fires, like multiple fires that you put out on a daily basis. So it's taking that time to go, okay, I need some time for myself, and actually give that time to you, because you have definitely earned it by all of the things that you're doing to support your people.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. And for all of our listeners, we hope that you have the best holiday season and that you set the boundaries around what you and your family need to enjoy it to the highest level and celebrate all the things that are important to you. So with that, thank you so much for listening in, and we hope that you have a great week.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Talent Optimization Podcast. You'll find more tools and resources for CEOs and HR professionals looking to bridge the strategies versus implementation gap of talent optimization at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. We've also created a free, valuable resource for you to begin bridging the gap called the Talent Optimization Foundation Membership Program. You can access it for free at elevatedtalentconsulting.com/foundation. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode to learn more about talent optimization and creating a dream team for your organization.